Welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders. We are so thankful that you joined us. And please remember to subscribe here on our YouTube channel or follow and like us on your favorite social media outlet, which you can find links to in our show notes for even more fair housing news and insights. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Fair Housing Insiders and episode 80. We are focusing today on VAWA, the Violence Against Women Act, and we have Kathy Williams with us here today, and I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr. So, Kathy, help us out here. What is VAWA?
VAWA, which, as you mentioned, is the Violence Against Women Act, is a federal law that takes all kind of actions to protect the victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, or stalking. And the federal law protects, even though it's called violence against women, it does protect both women and men from those four VAWA crimes.
Very good. Thank you. So, for our audience, the property management professionals, how does this law, how does it impact them?
Well, we kind of have to break down the protections provided by VAWA specifically, and that those protections apply to federally funded properties and most low-income housing tax credit properties. And there are very specific procedures set up by the law that the landlord has to take to make sure that they are not denying housing to victims of VAWA crimes. Now, on a more general standpoint, we also have to mention that for private market housing, it is viewed that it might be sex discrimination for a landlord to take action against a female resident who is a victim of a VAWA crime.
Digital is a marketing and technology company specializing in the multifamily housing industry. We're a motley crew of industry professionals who all share a passion for a common purpose: to transform the apartment marketing industry through creative, data-driven, digital marketing and technology solutions and world-class client support. Contact us today at digital.com.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for breaking up the two different types of housing and the responsibilities there. So appreciate that. So why don't we go into a scenario now? We'll take a look at this scenario, and then we'll come back to you, Kathy, for your comments and some questions about it.
Morgan, I was just on the phone with Miss Wellington. This is the third resident today who has complained about Mrs. Landon in Unit 951.
I know. It's the same thing every time her ex-husband comes to pick up or drop off the kids. There's an argument, the police show up. It's just a mess.
I feel bad for her too, but with all of these complaints, shouldn't she be given a notice of termination? I mean, don't we have a zero tolerance policy written in the lease?
So an interesting scenario. So Kathy, can residents still be cited for disruptive behavior? And what if the police are constantly being called?
Okay, first of all, before I address the first part of your question, let me just mention that you need to be very careful in taking action where police are being called. You don't want to do something that somehow makes it a lease violation, that a resident is calling the police to protect herself from the violence of her partner, or in this case, the ex-husband. So police calls shouldn't, unless they're being made, for instance, by by the neighbors because they're so upset of the noise. It should never be that the police are being called by the victim, that is a lease violation. And then kind of to address more of a general nature, and these are very difficult situations for everybody, including the landlord that are trying to find out who the victim is and who the perpetrator is. So in these situations, I think it's important for the landlord to do a reasonable amount of investigation, at least get the police reports that resulted from these calls, find out if the police is holding one person responsible or both people, for instance, responsible. Also, to talk with the resident about what the resident can do to decrease the incidents that are involved. For instance, in this scenario, we had conflict, violence erupting when the ex-husband came over on a regular basis to pick up the kids. So maybe there's something the resident can do to decrease that conflict. By, for instance, having the ex-husband pick the children up outside the apartment and not inside the apartment. In other situations, you may find that the perpetrator of the domestic violence has left the unit, for instance, if they were a resident or a frequent visitor, and the landlord is working with that resident to reduce those situations. And then the resident invites the boyfriend, the ex-husband, to come back into the unit, and then the violence erupts all over again. In those situations, there certainly should be a conversation about what the resident's responsibility is to reduce the contact and therefore reduce the violence, and that the resident has responsibility under the lease. The landlord will work with that resident who is the victim, but doesn't have to ignore actions taken by the resident, which just puts herself or himself, in the VAWA case, right back into a violent situation. So those are the kind of concerns that should be reviewed, should be discussed with the resident and carefully documented. And if the resident refuses to take reasonable steps to protect herself from the violence, it could be that lease termination may be appropriate at the end of that review and investigative process.
Thank you so much, Kathy. Very sensitive subject for sure, but we appreciate your eloquence and being able to help our property management professionals understand how they can handle those types of delicate situations. So appreciate your insight as always. And thank you to our wonderful community. Thank you for tuning into the show. Until next time, take care, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we can't wait to hear your feedback about today's episode. Do you have a topic that you would like to see discussed in a future episode? Feel free to share that with us. In the show notes, you'll see a link to sign up for our newsletter. This newsletter will keep you up to date with our latest episodes, blogs, and information about our online fair housing courses. Thank you again, and happy training.